Welcome, everyone. It's exciting to have a full house, if you will, here at the Armory. We normally do these presentations at the library, and I won't be surprised if we have a few folks sort of wandering in because they went to the library first, which is fair. I would do the same thing because we are all creatures of habit. But since 2011, we've been doing monthly programs at the White Bear Lake Library, and now that we have our own space here at the Armory, we are slowly working to transition things here. So we are thrilled to, we were worried that, if you change people's habits, it'll fall apart. So anyway, it's a joyful to have folks here. Plus, you get to see the Festival of Trees if you have not, with the lights outside down. So that's an extra bonus because we don't have a lot of evening hours as of yet for that. So anyway, a few housekeeping things. I am Sarah Hansen, the executive director here at the White Bear Lake Area Historical Society. And my technical director / creative director / everything else is Dan Jones in the back setting up more chairs, which is awesome. And many of you have probably heard over time, if you've done anything with us, from Allison Lincoln, our community engagement director, who is not here tonight because we've all been basically sleeping here with the trees. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll let folks just sort of settle in just a little bit. I do want to acknowledge a couple of people in this process and as we get started, and so I'm going to go ahead and do that here. First off, Rob, I'm going to make you stand up. I would like to give a round of applause to Rob Flick. This was a project that he began. The core of this program, if you will, presentation, in many ways it comes from Rob and his research that he's done. And he was inspired, and I have to admit, I don't know, did he pronounce it the French way or is it Belanger or Bellinger? Okay, the White Bear way. Perfect. So a lot of his information comes from Roger Bellinger, who started a history of officers, sworn officers at the department through the years. And then Rob has picked up that torch and carried it forward as time has gone on. And I have to tell you, Rob, Dan's the one who had to put in the young picture and the later picture. So just, if you want to. That's right. We had a debate on that. So if you want to, go after anybody. But Rob obviously was with the department from 1984 to 2021 as a sworn officer, and then came back as a community service officer. So his service has been extensive, as was Roger's during his time period as well. In addition, I would like to acknowledge the city of White Bear Lake, and I won't make folks from the city stand up unless Chief Dale would like to stand up. Come on, just real, yeah, there we go. Okay. And the city of White Bear Lake's been incredibly supportive in this project, and one of the things that we are always looking to do as the Historical Society is fill in gaps of information that we don't have, or fill in stories that we're missing. And so one of the things we know is that we have a tremendous amount of information about the White Bear Lake Fire Department, or the various names it had over the decades. For a variety of reasons, we have a lot of photographs and a lot of information. We have far less for the White Bear Lake Police Department. And so this was an opportunity when I spoke with Lindy Crawford, our city manager, and said, there's something here. There's something we can pull at. And I am pleased to tell you we've been doing that. So part of the research for this project has been funded through the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment, or Legacy, as you know, through a grant from the Minnesota Historical Society. And then, of course, our work is always supported by our members here at the Historical Society. So thank you all. When I say Rob is responsible for this, I mean it. This is a slide that Dan made, but it shows the title of what Rob started putting together and got me all excited. I was only around a little bit last year. I was out for some stuff, and one of the days I came in, we were walking through the new public safety building, and I got a chance to see this album that Rob had put together, and it's a pictorial index of sworn officers, a chronological compendium, and it literally starts in 1881 when the village is organized until today. And if you can imagine how many officers have come through. And we're still, I'll be perfectly frank, we are still piecing it all together from all of our resources. But there are some great stories that have come forward. And as I've told a few folks, technology, I gotta love it. As I've told a few folks, as you've been coming in tonight, this is probably like a 6-part series of programs because there's so much that we could possibly tell. So this will not cover everything by any means, and I'm certain that many of you will have stories to share as well, and please do. That's part of what we like to do here. So I will start with one of the first things we talked about when we met with the police department to sort of kick off the research is, could someone explain to me the difference between sheriff, deputy, marshal, officer, police chief, constable, all the terminology? I thought I had a handle on some of that. I don't. And I'll explain why. So first of all, so all of these terms tend to come from England, and they came over with the colonies, okay? We think we know what they mean, but then they're not necessarily used the way that they were intended always, especially in older records. So for example, sheriffs are typically county-based and elected, okay? And deputies fall under, although you can have a deputy marshal and a deputy whatever, they're basically just the next layer down. So sheriffs are pretty straightforward. Marshals get a little tougher. You typically see those with villages, for example, sometimes with cities, which you'll see with ours, even after we change from a village to a city, but varies. Well, I'll explain when we get into it. Officer, that is pretty straightforward. Police chief, we didn't start using that terminology until much later, probably 75 years ago or so. And then constable is something that I always associated again with a sheriff's office or with like a township and unincorporated area. Well, I'll tell you, in the city and the village minutes, we've got constables all over the place. But we also have marshals. So, exactly. I heard it. Interesting. Yeah, precisely. So it gets interesting fast. So what I will say is that if you hear me switching back and forth, I try to use whatever they're using at the time in the records. So sometimes it'll be a little bit odd, and please don't hesitate to ask. Say, now wait a minute. So our law enforcement was established at the very get-go, as you can imagine. It was established a little bit tough to read, and you certainly don't have to, but these are the incorporation papers, or this is part of the incorporation documents for the village of White Bear from 1881, February of 1881. And it says, at the top, it says, the elective officers of said village shall be 5 trustees, so the council, if you will, and 1 justice of the peace, who shall be, I have to be able to read, styled village justice. The trustees shall hold their respective office for a term of 1 year, and the village justice for the term of 2 years, and until their successors are duly elected and certified. So the justice of the peace, as you can imagine, plays a huge role in the law enforcement because that once you get someone, I want to say once you nab them, but I sound like I've been talking gangsters again. Once someone is charged with something, obviously the justice of the peace gets involved, and so that's where you'll see lots of interesting things as well. Now the next section, of course, deals with the council having, at their first regular meeting after the annual election, they have to appoint a recorder, treasurer, blah, 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 street commissioner, all the fun things, and a village marshal. So that is where, like I said, we're pretty clear from the beginning. We have a village marshal. We think it's easy, right? Not so much. So when we start out with this, in 1881, what they're talking about in those documents is the establishment of the village, incorporating the village of White Bear. And what we see here is that first parcel, or that first area that is the village. Now you'll see it's mostly along the lake, along Lake Avenue. It doesn't go super deep. It includes the railroad tracks, which is basically roughly Highway 61 today. And then it does go a little bit to the west, but not hugely. That's it. That's what we're talking about in 1881 as what would eventually become the city of White Bear Lake. Now, this incorporates out of White Bear Township, which was 6 square miles. So White Bear Township initially was everything that is today the city of White Bear Lake, Vadnais Heights, North Oaks, Gem Lake, if you can envision all of that territory. And the main reason for incorporation in 1881 are these resorts you see. Townships have a very different form of government, and they are only authorized to do certain things, deal with road maintenance, do different, have dog catchers, dog pounds, weed inspectors, other things like that. And it's changed a bit over the years, but at this point, that was the case. They cannot regulate liquor. They cannot regulate gambling. They cannot regulate licenses of any kind, basically, at that point. And so with the tourism industry that we had, the hotels, the Chateau Gay and the Williams House, the O'Malley Pavilion and the South Shore, or yeah, the South Shore House, the Hotel Lipe, we had thousands of people coming to the lake each summer, and they were doing what you do on vacation. They were drinking, they were gambling, they were doing all sorts of other things. And literally the first ordinances of the village actually covered everything from drinking and gambling and all of that, to billiards, to circuses, to all sorts of entertainment, dancers and different things. I mean, it's all of those things. So it's not necessarily, just the stuff where you can lose money or whatever, but a lot of things. So with that, the village had one marshal, but they needed a lot of people because, as you can imagine, when you have thousands of folks at these resorts, you need people to patrol. So what they did almost immediately is they had a marshal, and we don't know who all of these folks are. So if anyone says, hey, wait a minute, that's my grandpa, or that's whatever, and it's not unlikely that happens. We would love to hear more about that. Yes. Well, yeah. The comment up here is the requirement was they must have a mustache. Yes. And not a lot else, frankly. They didn't have a lot of restriction. They had to be willing to serve, basically. And most of those folks there would have been what were referred to as special police. People were essentially deputized or selected as special police by the village council, often, almost always, without pay in those early years. They started getting paid $2 a day at one point, but they typically would bring on special police for the 4th of July holiday because we'd have an influx of people. They would typically bring on special police for Halloween because kids got into a lot of mischief over Halloween. I mean, pretty treacherous vandalism kind of stuff over Halloween. So they would pull in lots of folks, and so they would distribute these badges. And like I say, in the early years, for sure, they were typically unpaid. So Reuben Cluett was nominated or elected as the first village marshal. Now, it's interesting because he was elected immediately, but he only served for a brief time. He resigned his post. He was only there about 6 months, and so he resigned his post in August of 1881. He was replaced by a gentleman named J.E. Burns. Now, and that was fine. He was there for a little bit. But Reuben Cluett, should not be confused with his brother Albert, who ended up serving as marshal for a while later, a few years later. Particularly when the large burial mound at Shady Lane and Lake Avenue was being exhumed. Albert Cluett was one of the marshals at that point, one of the law enforcement at that point. Now, that makes you kind of go, huh. I often try to track all of these connections for these folks, try to kind of figure out who they are and where they came from on Ancestry and other databases. This was a nightmare, mainly because most of the people we're going to talk about are interwoven and interconnected. So-and-so was married to his neighbor, who happened to be the other guy's sister, and circles it back around. Now, keep in mind that there were only about 1,100 people in the village at this time, so it's not shocking that and many of them were children. Another chunk were women. You only have so many people available to do these jobs. So All right, so 1881, we've got a couple of folks coming and going, and then by 1882, we have George C. Hooter, who you see here. Now, he was elected in 1882 as the street commissioner and village marshal, but in September, it shows him resigning as constable. His position is so do you see where there's confusion? So he also didn't last very long, and that wasn't super uncommon. It continued on for quite a while that way. We did get settled in a little bit with a gentleman named James Lonergan, who you see here. He actually was elected village marshal in 1887, and he's reelected each year because they were elected for 1 year at a time. He was reelected each year until 1894, when suddenly Reuben Cluett appears on the scene again, because why not? There seems to be a little bit of a disruption, and this is something I haven't been able to track completely down yet, and I'm hoping that we can find more, but for right now, we're left to speculate. But in November of 1893, the village council had a special meeting regarding the suspension of Marshal Lonergan for, quote, not doing his job. I don't know what that means. The council at that meeting voted 3-2 to reinstate him. So he came back. And then by 1894, Cluett was elected. So I'm not sure exactly what happened. Interestingly, there's another note in the minutes that says in March of 1895, so about a year later, the council invited the marshal to tender his resignation until he can establish his innocence in the case now pending. Now, this would have been Cluett, so I don't know what's going on. 2 weeks later, Lonergan, who's suddenly back, resigns as constable, and a gentleman named J.H. Tubasing is appointed marshal with Daniel Ivet as night watchman. So it's sort of a revolving door for the first decade or so. Interestingly enough, Lonergan, what you saw a moment ago was a close-up, a zoom-in of this shot. Lonergan actually serves on the village council then after he's finished being marshal / constable / whatever he was. So he's seen here in 1896 and 97 on the village council as part of that group. So always interesting. Things settle down, and there's much more consistency now as we get into the mid-1890s. Here on the bicycles is one of my favorite pictures that we have of law enforcement. And in fact, I have to tell a funny little story. I was working the beach dance a couple of years ago, and we were working the gate at the Manitoba Beach Dance. And the mayor Lewis Met, rode up on his bike, and he was talking to somebody, talking to one of the CSOs, and he said, I came up and said hi and whatnot, and he said, oh, hey, we're just talking about bike cops in town. And I said, oh yeah, we used to have those. He said, we did? I said, well, yeah, in like 1895, 1900, and he just looked at me. That's not what I meant. So you have to take some of the things I say with a grain of salt. But anyway, so we've got Daniel Ivet here. He was elected village marshal. So he was the one who was night patrolman or night watchman in the last round. He was elected village marshal in 1896 when Lonergan gets on the council, and served in that role until 1903 when health issues caused him to step down in the fall of 1903. He died just a few years later, so I'm not sure what the health issues were exactly, but he pretty much didn't come back into things at that point. But what I think is fascinating, and this is why I love looking at these things with different perspectives or different lenses. So we've had this picture of the fire department for years. I've seen this picture no less than 1,000 times. I didn't realize these two are police officers. They're not, they probably helped with the fire department too, which was typical. But I didn't catch that at first. So the one on the left is Gus Holside, August Holside, and the one on the right is Daniel Ivet, the gentleman on the bicycle. So a much better picture where you actually get to see who he is. So kind of fun to be able to piece that together. What are they? I'm sorry, what? Where? Oh, hanging down? I have no idea. There we go. The question is, why are all of these things hanging down? But that makes sense, to get in with the movement to keep the flies away from the poor horses. Good question. So here entertainingly, we see Gus Holzite behind the bar. He had a bar in town for a number of years where most recently it would have been Holohan's on 3rd Street. This is the inside. It's actually, it was the White Front for many years. It was also known sometimes as Gus's Place for Gus Holzide. But we're talking the turn of the last century. So not in anyone's memory here, but the White Front people could potentially remember. Now, one of the fun things, or one of the interesting things, again, and this is actually something that Rob referenced in his notes in his book, the binder that he put together, and I missed somewhere along the way. But the gentleman here is identified in our databases as a gentleman named Stram, last name Stram, who only appears very tangentially in the records, at least that I can find. He's recognized as Charles Stram, and next to him is Emery or E.J. Cluett. From what I can tell, Cluett was not law enforcement. He doesn't have a badge or anything, so that makes sense. We have several pictures of him. He got around town in a lot of ways, and again, he's another Cluett, part of the Cluett family, which was very large. But Stram comes and goes very quickly from the force. Interestingly, you'll see a graph in a few minutes that show sort of how many people we had in the lockup, the jail, over the years. Stram was elected and in office, or in his role, in 1911. That was basically the only year that he was there as that in that position. And the main activity that happened, as far as the minutes go, the official record shows, is that the Marshal's Star was replated in silver that year. It had to be redone. And a riot gun and several other pieces of hardware were ordered, which had never shown up in the past. The biggest thing we had dealt with before was handcuffs. So kind of an interesting piece. Now, like I said, when you look at the graph that's going to come in a minute, interestingly, 1911 is very high as far as number of folks in the lockup versus several of the years around it. So we don't know if that's because he was very aggressive or in arrests or whatever, or if it was there was that much going on. But 1911 doesn't stand out as any sort of crime spree that I'm aware of. So we'll have to see what we can track down from that standpoint. So these just show, this is similar to what I showed at the very beginning. These are when the village becomes a city. And so you can see, they're establishing justices and constables right away in the city charter, and then the power of the police officers. And here it actually calls out a chief of police shall possess and all regular or temporary officers shall possess the powers of constables at common law and under the statutes of this state. Goes on. Very important, obviously, but lots of things to say. But again, referencing constables, referencing chiefs, and all of that. Under when we have Charles Stram, Ann Holzide, and some of the others in there, I want to point out too that we still continue to have a night patrolman, what they refer to as a night patrolman. For over 20 years, the night patrol was led by a gentleman named Nels Nelson. Try to find a picture of that online. But from 1901 to 1922, he served under Marshals Ivet, Holzide, Burroughs, who came in just a little bit later, and was kind of the permanent fixture, if you will, for that role for many, many years. So one of the fun things that we've discovered, well, lots of fun things, but this building was the first fire station, city hall, village hall, really, police station, all the things. And then the building next to it, which still stands today, this one's gone, but this one that still stands today was the jail. That jail got there in the 1890s. Prior to that, there had been a jail across the highway. We don't know exactly where, so again, this is one of those things that we're playing with, but we know it was between Miller and Murray, and between 2nd and 4th on property over there. So not far from where the public safety building is today, in that same vicinity, but there is a mention of it being moved over by the village hall, across the tracks, from the west side of the tracks to the village hall. So we know that it was over there. What's interesting is that in September, so that the fire station was built in 1888, the wooden building, and in September of 1921, the Village of White Bear is chartered, as we saw. And after a tremendous debate, because this is how it always goes with things like this, in October of 1921, the village changed its legal name from the Village of White Bear, or the City of White Bear, I'm sorry, to the City of White Bear Lake. They added the word lake, which was a huge conversation. At that point, the population of our community was just over 2,000 residents, so we've jumped up. And its boundaries had really not changed from what it was in the 1880s when the village itself was formed. So, as I said, the original fire station and police station is what you see here. The fire station was built in 1888, and then the jail was across the way. If you zoom in on the little jail building there, you can see that it hasn't changed hardly at all, but it was considered the new jail, and it was opened officially on November 25th, so tomorrow, of 1896. So almost 129 years ago. Today you'll see some pictures later of the building that replaced this, but this is actually the Domino's Pizza building on the corner of Clark and Second, and then the jail building still sits there. You'll see some more. Yes, yep, exactly. It was the Methodist church at this point, but yep. So this gets really interesting and somewhat entertaining as we go through, and sad at different points. So I mean, this is a serious thing, but one of the most interesting resources we have is this book, which is the lockup register for the Village of White Bear. It starts in 1894, starts recording in April of 1894, and continues on until 1960. If you can imagine, that's a lot of years of lockup history, if you will. Now, these are not necessarily everyone charged with anything in town. It's not necessarily whatever, and it's you can just kind of get a basic sense of it. But it's the people who are held in the jail itself. And the register across the top, it has columns, and now depending on who, just like any other record, depending on who filled it out at any given time, you got some information, you didn't get others. But it has the date and time of lockup, the name of the prisoner, their marital status, gender, age, whether or not they were a resident of the village, their birthplace, and that of their parents, the birthplace of their parents, arresting officer, any witnesses, the amount of money or other property on their person, the offense, the date of commitment and discharge, how they were disposed of, the amount of bail, and any other comments or notes such as occupation, etc. Often that column just listed who the justice of the peace was and what happened. Almost always they were heard before the justice of the peace, got a fine, and went home. It was pretty typical.
Is the money they have on them, the bottom one, is that the $2? I mean,
yes.
So
yep.
If you go up, what, 4 people had money on them?
Yeah.
And the rest had nothing.
Presumably. Again, it depends on who's filling it out, I suppose, if they're being completely thorough. But a lot of the folks, in which if we were to, this is just an example of a page, but if we were to zoom in, you'd see that a lot of the cases are dismissed. A lot of the folks aren't necessarily kept for any length of time. But the things that are incredibly fascinating in these things are the little side notes. And so it's a little tough to read this one, but this is when the new jail is being opened. And it says new cells for jail being put in, had to keep him in engine room. William Clark signed it. First of the new jail, first prisoner. He was signing off on someone else, a different line on the thing, but Lonergan is, so he's recording who is the first prisoner, essentially. The guy before him, the jail wasn't ready, so they had to keep him in the engine house. And then when they moved and arrested the next person, they had the first prisoner showing.
Does the book say what the offenses are?
Yeah, it's almost so in the early years, and in fact, this kind of shows it a little bit. In the early years, it's typically alcohol related, drunken, disorderly, or alcohol somehow. As the years go on, it becomes much more automobile related. So now I'm hearing a lot of murmurings, and I want to point out a couple of things, and then there's a reason I put this up here. So first of all, you can see it starts in April. The record starts in April, and it's not shocking that things peak in the summer as far as numbers. I mean, we don't have huge numbers anyway, but not shocking that things peak in the summer. What I did find entertaining is that the first female in the lockup was a lady named Mary Auger, and I probably shouldn't say lady because she was in the lockup for using abusive language. I say there are a lot of folks who could be in a lot of trouble if that was the standard we were using today. She ended up having her case heard, and she paid the court costs of $6.30 and was sent on her way. We don't know which, we have some members of the Auger family here. We don't know which Auger string she comes from. We've been playing with that, but we found her thoroughly entertaining. The other that I find entertaining, December would probably be much quieter typically, but there was a group of about 6 folks who were caught gambling. They were playing cards, and they got taken in December of that particular year. So kind of interesting to see what pops up and what does what. I won't go through, these are each by year, but just to give you kind of an idea of the total number of folks in the jail. 1904 is interesting because, as you see, there's a note that says 3 masked men hold up the jailer and release prisoner Charles McAvoy, who was in for picking pockets. So there was, there were things going on for sure. And then this is the chart that I mentioned earlier. So to give you just kind of an idea, this is how many people were in the lockup for each of these years. And as you can see, in 1911, it spikes up higher than it had been certainly prior to that, but then dips back down again. So I'm not sure what was exactly happening there. Dan flagged or shaded the end of the graph for me primarily because prohibition started at that point. It continues on a little bit, but it's interesting. People ask us all the time, you talk about gangsters, you talk about the different law enforcement and all the things that were going on. Georgie, what are you doing? Oh, you're getting candy. Yeah. What are you doing, kid? She's like, I was trying. Anyway, my general response when people ask about White Bear during Prohibition, were our cops looking the other way? Were they doing different things? We only had a couple. I mean, they couldn't get to all the things anyway. So generally speaking, I think, and to be fair, in the village or in the city, the newly formed city, at that point, there wasn't as much activity like that. It was really in the farms and in the open areas where they had stills and things. She's being a character. She wants me to stop. Just saying. She's going under the table now. Anyway, but we'll jump ahead here. So this picture is kind of fun. It's hard to make out a little bit, but I want to just point out that some of the changes in technology, and they are extreme, as you can imagine. But this is actually a light that's hanging. It's very hard to make out, but this is Clark Avenue. So at 3rd Street, you're standing at 3rd and Clark, so by Premier Bank or the Getty Building, which is there today, formerly Reese's Liquor Store and many things, looking down toward the lake, okay? So there was a line strung across from the Getty Building over to the Long Hotel, which is essentially the liquor store on the other side now, was Fraser Automotive for many years and a number of other things. But that light was the call system for the police officer in town. So when the operators in the Getty Building, the telephone operators, got the call that someone needed a police officer, they'd flick on the light. The cop would have to see the light and then call in and find out who needed help. Yeah, probably not the quickest. And it was similar for, when we talk about fire calls, they would ring the bells and people would have to hear them and come to the station. And so, as you can imagine, response times were not tremendous. And it just, they were on patrol. Yep, they were just wandering around, or not wandering around, but probably shouldn't say that. They were patrolling and doing their jobs. So it just depends. A couple of things we have in our collection, which shows how technology shifted over the years, not tremendous leaps and bounds here, but this is actually one of the call boxes that would have hung from those lines over the building. This one has colored lights or colored globes in it, but would serve the same purpose. And then on the other side is, if you've ever been in over the years, if you've ever been in the dispatch area, the lobby of dispatch in the police station, which is no longer used that way, but if you've ever been in there and you had a dispatcher who was on a call or whatever, there was color coded on what light was lit up and how you could, if you could talk to them or not, because they were on answering a 911 call or that sort of thing. So we've got these two items in our collection, which is kind of fun to be able to tell the story of how things were used. So not everything always went perfectly, as you can imagine. We have, these are minutes from 1925, election results. Here you see Louis Girard. He received 559 votes for constable. At this point, they were electing them in a staggered pattern, so 2 years for one of them and 1 year for the other. And then Bill Rose, who you'll hear about some more as we go, got 566 votes for 1 year. So those two were elected for their positions. Interestingly, not long after that it's about 2 years after that, but Louis Girard is in the paper because he's being arrested along with 3 others when the federal agents came through and did a raid for alcohol during Prohibition. So we were not exempt by any means, but again, kind of an interesting piece that pops up. So let me skip ahead here. Not keeping track on my minutes. Let's see. Okay, so by 1928, we see Bill Rose, who is listed on the minutes as Marshal, consistently as Marshal, and Reuben Cluett, who is now, this is now Reuben, the son of Albert, not the brother of Albert, because we've moved ahead in the time period. But Reuben Cluett, the son of Albert, listed as patrolman because Nelson has fallen ill and is hopefully returning, but at that point he's following along. In this particular parade shot, you see Bill Rose and Art Long, longtime officers, and if you talk to folks who've been around White Bear for years, people often remember Bill Rose and Art Long from when they were kids or whatever, catching them doing all sorts of fun things. We have lots of interesting stories. And then you see Art Long here with Ed Jackson, one of the Jackson family who lived in the downtown area. That's an interesting photo in its own right, but what I actually really like is the police car behind. That's a black police car that came just a little bit later, but we have a lot of shots of the white version that was presented. It was a 1937 squad car presented by the White Bear Lake JCs, the Junior Chamber of Commerce. It was presented in 1936, but it was a 37 model, I guess, brand new is what I understand. And so you can see Walter Berg, who is here, as well as, I have to stop and think. I'll tell you, Art Long and Bill Rose get confused in my head. That one is Art Long, I believe, because you see them here for the formal photo for the newspaper, standing with the JCs and some of the businessmen in town. But what I love about this is we've got Art Long, Bill Rose, and Frank Swanson. One of the few pictures we have of Frank Swanson when he shows up as constable, because that's what he was when he appeared in the photos. What's fascinating about this car is that it was converted, or it was considered to be a police car and an ambulance, if you can imagine. And so they're all fascinated by the back of the car where they're demonstrating. And now you can see how a patient would be used or put into the car. In later newspaper stories from the White Bear Press, they're talking about how that would be really helpful if they added a heater to the squad car. Not for the police officers, but for the comfort of the patients. So you never know. And they did eventually, as time went on, of course, get cars that were heated. But kind of an interest, again, technology changes. Here we see Bill Rose, and I believe he's holding a beer bottle. So I think they're at a holiday party or something, would be my guess. I'm not sure. Do you know?
I want to comment on that 37 Ford. It was
Yes.
a two-door model. And the reason it was a two-door, why they wanted a two-door, is because that front seat, if you've ever been in a two-door, it's folded down forward, and that's the only way they
could get the.
in there.
Did everybody hear that? What Lynn's saying, and so for those who may not know, this is Lynn Lindbeck, who is our car expert, because honestly, I almost called you today. If you look at a photo for me, to say, what year is this? But what he's saying is that this was a two-door model of the vehicle because the seat would fold down, and that was the only way you were going to get the stretcher to go in to the vehicle. Yeah, that's why they had to go through the trunk in the back. But they were able to do it. Now, just a few years later, the newspaper is reporting and boasting that they have another vehicle that is a hybrid, sort of, not in the way we use it today, but multi-purpose vehicle that you can fit 2 patients in very quickly. Yeah. We were thankful we had something, so it's, it is what it is. But anyway, so you can see the crowd, or the group gathering there. Another of my favorites, this is bringing the black car back in, and this might have been the one, it's much wider. This might have been the one that could fit 2 patients. We have not confirmed that piece of it yet, but this would have been the annual Memorial Day parade being led to the cemetery, to Union Cemetery, across the highway there at the end of Lake Avenue. Okay, so this is interesting. So this is, okay, it's so hard to see what it looks like on my computer versus big. So we're looking at the bank down here. So this is the Benny's Barber Shop and the big bank clock, First State Bank clock, which is actually on display in our exhibit, which then moved up here to where the bear is on the building. They took the bear down when First State Bank bought First National Bank and moved down the street, because we like to just move around in the same space. But what's interesting about that is then First State Bank, that was further down the street near what is today Washington Square Bar and Grill, decided to move to Clark Avenue to the new bank, which is, of course, US Bank on Clark Avenue now, across from the Domino's Pizza and across from the library and all of that. And one of my favorite pictures of all time is this image of the money truck and the police loading at the bank on Washington Avenue. And the majority of the funds were actually walked down the street with a police escort to the new bank in the early 1960s. So if you can imagine, and obviously they're having a little fun with it, but which is interesting because we had a slew of bank robberies in the early part of the 1900s. So it's kind of intriguing, but as you can imagine, like I said, they had a little bit of fun with it. They're posing at the new bank now. And then you can see what that looked like when it was first there, but their new establishment. So just like we needed a new bank, new spaces, new things, the community was growing dramatically. As I said, from 1880 to 1920 or so, the population doubled, but the area of what was the village and then became the city didn't grow tremendously. That changed in the 1950s, 1960s. We were growing rapidly as areas out of Wiper Township were being annexed into the city for a different variety of reasons, for different services and things. And so we needed a lot more of everything, including a larger police station, fire station, because if you can imagine, this is a 1932 picture, but shows what is today the Domino's Pizza building and the jail building still tucked back next to it. If you can imagine trying to fit even one of our fire trucks, I'm not even sure the chief's squad would fit in those doors today, but we needed more space for all the things. So in 1962, the department moved across the highway, built a new police department, and moved across the highway, and were able to set up shop, if you will, that in their 1960s. And then, of course, in recent years, we'll see some more current pictures in a moment. As part of that, both the population boom and the communities. Testing, okay. Uh-huh. Um, go figure. Did you take the other one away? A's, double A's, sorry. All right. As part of the 1960s, the population boom, and then the community's response to that, the city of White Bear Lake actually won an All-America City Award from Look magazine in 1964. We had actually won a runner-up award or an honorable mention in 1957. And there were many, many elements of this award that made this award happen. Everything from our school systems and expanding the schools, which happened in the 1960s, to expanding our public safety entities, to roads and rerouting things, tearing down a number of buildings in the downtown that were falling apart. And we literally have an entire presentation just on this. So I won't bore you with all of that right now. Thank you, sir. All right, there we go. But it was a very interesting time with a lot of change happening. And I just want to say that also at that time, not everything was rosy. We look at all the kind of the positive, and I'll talk a lot about the jail and whatnot with the sort of Mayberry feel of we threw them in the engine house because we didn't have keys, or we weren't set up with the new jail yet. At the same time, we had some tragedy, and many of you are probably familiar with the story of Dennis Juergens, who was a 3-year-old boy who, in the end, was abused, suffered a victim of tremendous child abuse. He's shown there with his adoptive parents, Harold and Lois Juergens, and holding him. And people didn't acknowledge that in 1965 when it happened. He died in April of 1965. What's interesting about this is that Lois Juergens came from a big family. There was like 16 kids. And other family members knew or were suspicious, but didn't speak up. People in general didn't speak up. There were professionals on all the different levels of this that didn't speak up. And so the case, nothing happened in the 1960s. But in the 1980s, his birth mother came back looking for him and started unraveling the story and figuring out what had happened, and came back, and actually they charged her. They were able to charge her, and she was convicted of 3rd-degree murder. What's interesting about this, and I want to acknowledge this, is that her brother, Jerome Zerwas, was on the police force at the time that all of this happened. He faced accusations and speculation like crazy that he had impacted the investigation. I don't know. I don't know if he did or he didn't. What I do know is that he served for 20 years. He retired a decade after all of that, and was never charged with anything. So, but when we see him here actually lifting fingerprints, it's a great picture of lifting fingerprints off of a window piece. So served for 2 decades with the department. But not everything, like I say, not everything was wonderful. There's a lot of, we can joke about the abusive language and profanity or whatever getting you into the lockup, but there were a lot of serious things, of course, that our officers deal with every day, now and then. So we jump right through, because again, we'd be here all night if we didn't. But we jump right through a number of the more recent things. But one of the things that I find fascinating is that also for 2 decades, or for about 20 years, we had back-to-back female police chiefs here in White Bear. So Lynn Banks she was not our first female officer, but she was our first female police chief. And then, of course, Julie Swanson was our most recent past chief. And so the 2 of them served for a total of 20 years for us, And then, of course, today we have Chief Hager. So interestingly, again, with the buildings, time marches on. We have bigger equipment, we have larger populations, we have more needs. And so you can see an update to the police and fire station. And this is where, for example, when I was talking about the dispatch center earlier, if you had gone into the dispatch center 10 years ago, you would have seen those lights, the different tiered lights in the lobby of the police and fire station. And up until the recent upgrades and expansion, you would have seen the, this is where the police cars would have gone, which is kind of interesting. I don't have pictures of the new station. We realized that you need to go to an open house and check it out, because that would be more fun than me showing photos. But I shouldn't say we don't have pictures. I don't have pictures in the program, but we do have pictures of it. But again, didn't want to overload. So as we jump ahead to these, I want to point out, we started this talking about special police in the beginning and in the 1880s. One of the things that we found fascinating is that in the halls of the police station, the public safety building, there are, of course, photos and different badges and patches and things from the decades, through the decades. I love these that show special police, special officer, special police, reserve, community service through the years, primarily because that I know that there's a difference between our officers and our community service officers and what they're allowed to do and all of those things. But to me, they're all community service officers, because they're there to help. They're there to do whatever we need to keep us safe as a community and all of that. And I think it's fascinating that they've filtered on through those years. And again, like I said, we started with Rob. I'm going to come to the wind up piece here, but serving the community in many ways. That looks like a tough assignment out by the lake. I'm just going to say. Yeah, exactly. But lots of community engagement, lots of fun opportunities to, again, meet and connect, whether it's coffee with the cops or floats with the fuzz or all the fun, different creative things. And I'm going to close with this. This is a photo, and the official the official 2023 photo of the members of the department. And I happened to find the stats from a report that Chief Swanson did to the City Council in November of 2022, so about the same time period. And she was just giving the general stats from the department. But essentially, as of November of that year, so not a full year, but most of the year, there had been a total of 17,500 calls for the police, fire, and ambulance, if you can imagine, 17,500. 178 of those were persons in crisis. 209 of them were domestic assault calls. 335 were disorderly conduct. 80 were motor vehicle thefts, not carjackings, but just the vehicles themselves. 63 were assaults, not labeled as domestic. 17 were overdoses, 3 of which were fatal. 3,038 of them were traffic stops. And then she stated that if the department was at full strength, if it had full personnel, they would have 1 chief, 2 captains, 4 sergeants, 18 patrol officers, 4 investigators, and 2 school resource officers, plus the community service officers. That's an awful lot for our police department to respond to and take care of in any given year, if you will. And it's interesting to see how that sort of compares to what we were looking at in the small numbers and with 1 or 2 officers on hand. But and with that, I will wrap up the official portion of the presentation, but I'm happy to try to answer questions.